guys, thanks for joining me once again and welcome to the History Man channel. I'm in the capital of Poland today, I'm in Warsaw, and I'm doing a very special tour of the city, a communist tour. Always wanted to do it, so I thought I'd take the opportunity. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you see that I do free walking tours wherever I go. I did one in Krakow, the Jewish section of Krakow. This is going to be a very interesting tour. It starts in about 15 minutes, so I've got to make my way there. It's just up the road, so enjoy communist Warsaw.
That we would use just for meeting here. We start the communist tour because of this building, the so-called White House. The building which was the headquarters of the Polish United Workers' Party back in the communist days. So, during communism, we had a single party rule. The party, though, was not called a Polish Communist Party because people, after the experience of the World War II, were quite afraid of communism. After the experience of the World War II and pre-war, people were rather conservative, rather center-right. They would not vote for the communists, even though the World War II has shown that the far right is also not a good option. So they had to be a devil in disguise. They called themselves Polish United Workers' Party. And now have a look. It's Polish, it's United, it's Workers, so it's somewhat leftist. Welcome back. Hello there. And it's not a suggestion that it's a communist party. Why did they have to disguise? They were to participate in the elections. There were actually elections here in '47, even though the country was liberated by the Soviets, and even though the Soviets dispatched the troops right here around Poland to satisfy their needs in installing the proper system later on in the country. Anyway, there was a promise given to Western allies by Stalin when the war was coming to an end, that free elections will be held in most of the satellite states that were to become the satellite states of the Soviet Union. And guess what? We even know the partial results of those elections, because before they were forged, some people managed to count the votes. The Polish United Workers' Party, disguised once again as a democratic bloc, won about 45% of the votes maximum, in some regions even less than 20. So overall they were not able to get 80%, as it was claimed in official results that were given to public after the votes were counted. So the elections were forged, and the forgery was at the basic and at the basis of the system that was here for the next 45 years since 1945. So 47 saw the elections, but when the elections were held, to be honest, everything was already done. The future opposition members were thrown to jail, or they were harassed not to participate, or they were under control of the Secret Service, and the censorship and all of those media were closed or simply bought by the communists, and also the army was ready to enter the stage if needed, right? So the system was imposed on us, and from here, all those things that we will be talking about later on, here they were all invented, here they were all thought out. Now the building is a business center, but in 1989, when communists were dismissed in the first three elections, the building was given to an institution that was very capitalist. Warsaw Stock Exchange was established in the second half of 1989, and Warsaw Stock Exchange took the premises of the Polish United Workers' Party. Now it's moved out from here, it's no longer here. Now the Warsaw Stock Exchange is behind that building, but still you can buy, for example, a brand new Ferrari car right here. Still it's a business center where you can sign contracts worth millions of dollars and so on. So we have a saying about the people who died and who don't witness anything that happens after their death, that they turn in their coffins once it doesn't go their way. So probably those communists who are working here are now making a turn each time, like $1 million contract is signed or whatever. On our tour we will get to two basic parts of it. First one will be about like communism in Poland overall. So you'll get to know a bit about secret service, a bit about censorship, a bit about Polish economy in communism, a bit about some other things like going abroad, like living in a block of flats, like driving a communist car or something like this. And because these were the questions that were very frequently asked when I started to give that tour, and my colleagues as well. And then, after you know all the basics, you will get to see communist architecture at its best. So we'll get to see art and architecture in the second stage. Then you'll get to know how it all collapsed later on, because we will have also the pleasure to talk about solidarity and the crisis of the 80s. Finally, the final stop will be with the Palace of Culture in our site, so as you know, the visit card of Communist Warsaw. This fellow will be already in a moment on the ground, because we are leaving this here. We are getting to see the censorship office. My name is Jacek, once again, or I haven't introduced myself, I don't remember, I'm in a hurry, I was in a hurry. Jacek or Jack, you may call me both ways. I react to every Jacek and every third Jack, so you might be quite successful anyway. Shall we go? Yep. Let's go there. Censorship. So there were no free media, there was no freedom of speech in that country at the time of communism. They tried to isolate us from any news that was different than what they wanted to give us. So media were controlled. Also was were the other things like literature that was issued, like let's say rock concerts and lyrics of the songs that were sang right there, and so on and so forth. TV programs were admitted here, newspapers were admitted here. Everything that was shown, written to the people who had to come through that office where the guys were giving where they were giving the green or red light to publish or show that to the Polish people. What's also important, in the building which we saw before, there was a cinema where the guys from the Polish United Workers' Party, together with the guys from the censorship office, watched movies from the West to decide whether to shorten them, what to cut out, or to put them to the shelf and not show them at all. For instance, you couldn't have watched James Bond movies at all right here. They were only like distributed on VHS cassettes as second issue, such as was literature similar to George Orwell's 1984, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Animal Farm by Orwell, or some other things. Also music was strictly, let's say, limited, so they were rather not allowing to sell a lot of records of the groups of the 70s, those, you know, hippies and probably a blood and organ donor is driving it with 80 kilometers per hour on that street, because he would probably sooner or later end up on one of the pillars, and he would give his heart and lungs to someone who needs it. Anyway, that freedom of speech was missing. And when it comes to movies, James Bond movies, no, but the American movies about war in Vietnam, yes, especially if they were criticizing the states and the system and the leadership. So it was carefully selected what you could do and what you couldn't do. We of course could cheat the censorship as society. There was Radio Free Europe, the BBC Polish section. They were broadcasting from West Germany, from England, and you could manipulate with your antenna to get that. Of course, for listening to that, sometimes you could be even punished with some fine or jail. But it was only rather in the 50s and 60s during the biggest Cold War, the coldest war. Later on, it was not that very strictly prohibited. Censorship was also including censorship of correspondence. That's a telegram, and the telegram has a stamp. The stamp says censored. So even the telegrams about that someone's kid was born were actually read carefully in the post offices. All the letters that you got from abroad showed signs of opening, and they were usually carefully packed into a certain envelope, and it was written. It was made harm. The harm was made during during the transport or something like that, although everyone knew why they opened the things. By the way, many people had contacts in the West, many people had family members or like people who they knew, and those people were sending us money. Guess what? The censorship was never stealing money. It was always reaching us when they sent us Deutschmarks or dollars or something, but still that was open, right, to see what when we sent a letter abroad, what we are giving as an information. That was not really something worse in communist system, because something worse was economy. But why do we stay here? Also because of that monument. That will be a paradise for skaters in about a couple of hours, but now it's a monument to freedom of speech. The line was to hide everything. Sometimes you had the books that were printed with black lines inside, so you could see easily that something was censored. It was like in public, you knew that there was this institution, it was not secret. But when it comes to this, it goes away, right? It reveals everything that was hidden. So history had its white stains, newspapers had their white stains, books had their white stains. I have to go to my parents because they have one book that was officially issued, and it was issued still when the censorship was working, so you can see that there are gaps in the text, and it's even written on the basis of which bill the censorship had to be introduced. So cheating the system was easy when it comes to censorship. It was not so easy when it comes to economy. So we will get a small lecture on communist economy in practice in a moment. Has anyone been to Cuba or Venezuela recently? Or earlier? Cuba, right? Have you seen those state shops that you did not use, where they paid with different money, and when they were queuing with special booklets where they had written how much oil and how much rice could they buy, they could buy with their pesos? That's something similar to what was here. So let's use the same part of the street, and we will get the ministry yard, and we will talk about that. Brought it from home, or you just adopted it gradually? He's enjoying the sound. We have a lot of them here, so okay, just a few steps. We have to do. Okay. Before I open that, I found one thing that I would like to show you on my smartphone, because just today one of my favorite websites has published something that is connected with the censorship. In 1982, during the World Cup, Poland was playing the Soviet Union in the quarter-final round, and during the game, which was played in Barcelona, the Catalan people brought the band's solidarity banners with the logo of a trade union that was delegalized, and they placed them on the stands. The Polish TV was not broadcasting that game live because they knew that the this is a game of high risk where something not really proper can be shown, and it indeed, they were broadcasting it with 5 minutes delay, when in those 5 minutes they were cutting out all the moments, and I can show you what was brought to the banners. So behind the players you can see the Solidarity Union banners right there in the background. So all the world could have seen that right here. Well, okay, just one more try, but it's okay, I'm technologically impaired. So that is it, right? Solidarity at the background, right here, with a Catalan flag, by the way, also in the background. And after the first half, the officials from Poland who were to that game, they went to the Spanish policemen to take it away, because it was troublesome to cut it out every moment. Anyway, this is the group of buildings that are the government quarter. The communists built new Warsaw instead of the ruins that were here after the World War II. They made use that so much Warsaw was destroyed to build, for example, a new living quarter. That's what we would see later. And also they built the ministry quarter, and all the ministries were placed, as you can see, next to one another. Why? Because in case any riots were on, it would be easier to evacuate all those folks and to get them evacuated from the top of the hotel, which is here. We'll see the flat roof in a moment. This was adapted for the helicopters to land, to take them just in case. Why were they afraid of riots? Well, simply, they were afraid of riots because of that. This was the usual way of doing the shopping in Poland, not only in the 40s, when after the war you had shortages because the economy was really affected, but also, for instance, in the 60s and in the 80s. When I was young, this was really a common thing to see in front of any shop. Those people are not queuing to buy a washing machine. They are not queuing to buy a computer or a car. They are queuing to buy sausage, they are queuing to buy bread, they are queuing to buy anything, because nothing was in the shops. By nothing, I mean nothing. This is not a post picture where they pretend that it's a communist shop. This is a real picture taken in 1982 in a meat shop that was selling meat. Why were there all those shortages here? Well, the economy was nationalized. That was the principle, that you don't have private property. Everything will belong to the state. The state, they say, would distribute it in a just way. The state will set the prices on a just level, so on a low level, so as everyone can afford everything. And the state would control, according to a plan, how much of everything they would produce to satisfy the society's needs. Sounds like an utopia, and it was a utopia. You'll get to know about it why in two parts. First of all, have a look. Collectivization and nationalization, those were a necessity to run the state-owned economy. In most of the communist countries, this was collectivizing the agriculture and running the state-owned enterprises was successful. In Poland, it was partially successful. Agriculture was not collectivized. We had private property in farming. Elsewhere, everything was state-owned. And this was the real problem, because if you imagine you are farmers, right, then you will try to capitalize on what you produce by getting the most profit. And if you have the only way to sell your products via the state distribution, which offers you lower prices that you really spend than the costs you spend, where you will not be an idiot and you will only have to be forced to bring contingents, like during the war. But the contingents were not all the production, so this was a necessary minimum, and the rest was sold, not in the state shops, but on the black market. Have a look, this is the place where they traded with meat, close to the place where my wife was born, right? And it was not shocking, people were doing it like that. What's also important, we had a 2 or 3 currency system during communism. First of all, a zloty was worth nothing when it comes to its value, right? So we were preferring to go for buying things for US dollars on the black market, or Deutschmarks, or anything else that made sense. the state was really keen on the black market disappearing, so they tried to do the different shops that were selling goods of good quality for US dollars. So as people don't spend the US dollars on the black market, but so as the people spend dollars that they illegally acquired, because you could not go to an exchange office and exchange dollars, or in a bank you had to have a special booklet, and with this booklet and with the proof that you are going abroad, you are able to buy some amount of the foreign currency. So the illegally acquired sent US dollars you could spend in dollar shops, but these were the shops that were served in certain cities that were providing you with goods that were either to be exported from Poland or they were imported from abroad, and you could have bought them here. It was dramatically overpriced, first of all. For instance, a 10-pack of Wrigley's chewing gum in the Pevex store, we did not call them Tuzex as in Czechoslovakia or Intershop as in the GDR, but we called them Pevex. That was $1.20 in 1988, whereas in America it was 25 cents or even 2 dimes that you paid for that. When it comes to the goods, they were also bought for something like this. This is a communist dollar, as we refer to that. The coupons, we could exchange the dollars legally into such coupons. The state took 10% commission, and with those sheets of paper, we were paying in the dollar shops, right? So they did not call it money, they call it a cargo coupon or something like this. And when you showed this, you could also buy Western goods in certain shops. This one was for the seamen. So, you know, the seamen were paid with foreign currency because they were working abroad. This was for other contract workers and so on. What's a paradox? What a paradox is, the government never asked where you had the dollars from. They could be acquired illegally anywhere, and you were not punished for that after 56. But they were keen on getting them because the country was not producing a lot of things they could have sold abroad. So you were actually they were keen on robbing you from your dollars. That's why they also overpriced the goods. And when it comes to the name of the shop, Pevex was an abbreviation for the shop for selling internal export goods. Internal export makes totally no sense because export by its nature is external, but that was communism. Nothing was logical, right? But there was another purpose for the shortages. Not only that the farmers were not bringing enough food to the state distribution. The other thing was something that I will tell you about when we are in front of a milk bar. So there will be a one stop about something else than economy, and we'll come back to that later. So now we'll go to check out on communist architecture. Part 1. We'll see how this area would have looked if Stalin did not die in 53 but in 68. So this is actually not a communist architecture at its best. It shows signs of modernist architecture, of course made of poorer materials and made with some kind of communist planning, but it's still not the worst that could have happened to Warsaw. You will see what could have happened to Warsaw in a moment. So let us go. Flat with inlets of daylight every single time of day, also with some shops, with some terraces, with some common space like laundries and so on, the places where you could run social life. In communism, this was adopted in a communist way, so you had flats but nothing else. So when it comes to those flats here, they were quite good. Do you remember Animal Farm? And the conclusion was that finally the ideology turned into all animals are equal, but some of them are more equal than the others. So here in those blocks of flats, only privileged people could have lived. I mean like party members or military people or policemen or someone like this. If you were a normal person, you were given a flat by a cooperative, but elsewhere, somewhere away from the center, and it's green right now, so we might go across the street without looking a bit either the same car or we have a biker that makes those. So I'll hide the flag so as it's not on the ground anymore, because it's a flag anyway, so we should paint it back from the beginning. I hope that this noisy fellow, oh, that's yet another, or he painted it blue a moment ago, right? So, living in a block of flats during communism was full of surprises. No way that the flat matches the plan that you were presented when you were getting a flat. There were also some mistakes, like for instance, there was to be a large balcony, you got a small balcony. There was to be a terrace, you got a balcony instead. There was to be a concrete wall in between your sleeping room and the sleeping room of your neighbor. There was a cardboard wall or something like this. The walls were not always straight, but they were leaning to some under some angle, and common space in a block of flats was usually totally devastated. No one was taking care of common space, staircases, lawns, yards, they were totally devastated. People were stealing carpets, people were stealing light bulbs or something like this. Why? Because it belonged to the state. Your flat belonged to you as a member of a cooperative, but the common space did not. That's why if you go to Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine or other post-Soviet country, you'll still see it as well, because they have it even more imprinted to their head than we used to have. Finally, this would happen to Warsaw if Stalin was alive for a bit longer. This is a style that's called like communist classicism or Stalinist classicism. So it uses the patterns of classical architecture, columns, winged palaces, stairs and decorations that are classical, but that's all simplified so as a worker could understand it. So there were no, like, you know, motifs from Greek myths as you get on classical architecture or something like this. No, it was all to be plain and simple, and what is more, it was to be dramatically monumental. Why? Because you see such a building and you pay respect to the people who are inside. You start to pay respect to the people in power. You feel that little, and when you are standing in the hall, you are like overwhelmed by what's inside, right? So palaces were to be here, but palaces of a modern era, palaces for the people, right? Palaces where everyone could go, not only the chosen aristocrats or someone like that. So now we will get to see the milk bar. You know a lot about milk bars, I'm sure, if you were to the Old Town tour. But we will not talk about the idea of a milk bar, but how the milk bars looked like in communism and why we are using them right now with joy and we haven't used them with joy during communism. That will be the other part of the explanation why there were shortages and why you could buy nothing in a state-owned shop. So the key word would be 100% employment rate. And now let us go. You can get very cheap food, you are still served by yourselves, you are feeling like in a canteen, you get good quality food and the food is always there. What was it in communism? The food was never here. The quality of the place was really low, so to say that one of the milk bars by the University of Warsaw was nicknamed the Cockroach when my mom was a student, and it was not by chance that it was nicknamed like that. You had like half of the menu missing after the first hour, and it was always like very unpleasant ladies that were shouting at you and so on and so forth. Why was it so? I told you already, 100% employment. 100% employment rate is a utopia. I think only the Vatican City has 100% employment rate from all the countries that are in the world. Because have a look, if you give work to everyone, you of course avoid riots by the unemployed and so on. The communist ideologists, they were actually pretty afraid of unemployment, and they were making it a difference between capitalism where unemployment was severe, for example in the 30s, right? And everyone remembered the huge crisis where most of the people went unemployed in a month or something and they couldn't have found any work. On the contrary, they were starting to say like, okay, we will give work to everybody, but then the work was totally not effective. If you know that you won't be fired, why should you bother about the quality of your work? What is else? what is also important, you start stealing, you start working for yourself, because you know that even if you start stealing, even if you are corrupted, no one will actually punish you with firing you. You might be moved to a lower place in the hierarchy, you might be fined with some money, but when you get money from the bribes, who cares? You still have money to pay the fine. So that was a problem, that half of the food that was in the milk bar, or even more in some cases, that was sold by the back door by the workers of the milk bar on the black market with higher prices. If you went to the hotel and if you wanted a better room that you could afford, you were just paying the lady under the table and you could have been given anything. If you wanted to get a flat earlier, you were giving a present to the chairperson of the cooperative that was giving flats. Off you go, you have a flat earlier, the others are moved to the back. If you want to avoid the line, there you go, you meet a lady who works in the shop and then you meet with her by the back side entrance and you get what you wanted, paying her, not paying a shop. So that is why to a milk bar in communist times you went only when it was totally necessary, right? And that's why there was also nothing in the shops. The phenomenon of shopping in communism was so huge that I, for example, got my fishing rod before I was born. I was still in my mother's womb and she did not know even that I would be a boy or a girl, but because there was no ultrasonograph at that time here in Polish hospital, but my dad spotted the fishing rods and he said, we're gonna have a baby. If it's a boy, I will buy him that fishing rod, because I don't know when I will be able to buy that later. They are now here. So in our flat we had 4 rooms, and one of the rooms was divided in 2, and we stored the goods right over there that we bought just in case. There was, I think, like yet another TV set, as far as I remember, an extra toilet that we had, some panels that my dad planned to place in the corridor, but he did not, because then he bought tiles that looked better, and some other things that actually were there just in case, right? So you were shopping because things were in the shops, not that you needed them. That's also something different. And now, shopping for food, having a shelter, that's at the bottom of your needs, right? Then you may go for something more luxurious. Let's see what could be provided. We'll talk about the Fiat 126, the car of people's dreams in communist Poland. In Czechoslovakia, you were driving the Škoda's 105, right? That was the common car for an everyman in Czechoslovakia. In the German Democratic Republic, a Trabant is a symbol of communism. Here, it's the Toddler, or Maluch, or the Fiat 126. This car, you can see it on the advert from a folder when it started to be launched in Poland. The production was launched in 1973 as a licensed car. It was a car that was for every person. Its qualities were beyond any doubt really high. 21 horsepower engine of 650 cc. Probably your bikes are more powerful right here, and these are not the best bikes ever. It had the space for luggage underneath the front, not in the back. In the back there was the engine that was cooled with air. So when it comes to the model that is cooled with liquid, was introduced only in 1990. So this one is from the 1990s. It's not a communist-made car, because you can see the doors are different, and also it has a slightly better engine of 23 horsepower, cooled by air, not only by air inlets. It was a family car, believe it or not, but we could, with my family, we could have packed everything into it, and we went for a 4-week holiday to the lakeside, and it was actually also used for travels as far as Greece. My auntie was in Greece with that car, and she had a special camping van attached to it, designed for the toddler. We called it a toddler, the Hungarians call it a small Pole, the Cubans call it El Volantito as well. In Yugoslavia it's called Teglica, so the thing to iron, right? So that is actually popular also away from Poland. It was our export car. We have a fellow here who also had it. You have one still?
No, I don't have one.
Okay. Did the rust hit it?
Yes.
There you go. So it was also a problem that it was very often eaten by rust. And finally, the engine of that car could not be launched when the temperature fell below zero. So usually the procedure was as follows, that my dad was each time coming back from work, he took the battery out, he went to charge the battery with electricity all night long, and then he packed it into the car back again, and he launched the engine in the morning. So actually driving a Fiat was a pleasure. 115 kilometers per hour the engine could do, but my dad drove it once with 140 when he climbed the hill and switched the engine off. So then my mom, only once, she threatened him with a divorce, and it was just because she was in the car and us all when he was doing that. Finally, one of the Slovak guests of mine told me once a story that they had it in Slovakia where it's mountainous, and they lived on a hill, so all the family had to go out from a car before it made it up the hill because the engine couldn't have done it. But it was still the best what you could get right here in the 70s, and it was relatively cheap. By relatively cheap, I mean 84 times a monthly salary. Why? Luxurious good, right? It was not many cars like that produced right here. Finally, when you look at those people who are shown on the picture, you can see that they look like, I don't know, a communist version of a hippie or something like this. Although the propaganda was feeding us with stories that the West was bad, that the Western lifestyle was bad, and the things produced in the West were bad, we were still really keen on using Western goods and living Western lifestyle. So every record from the West was simply like worth as gold. Every piece of cloth from the West was equal to gold. We were going to East Berlin to buy the second-hand goods from West Germany that were available there because, for example, the West Germans visiting East Berlin threw them away simply, and we were wearing it with pride. We were like listening to Radio Luxembourg and then recording the crappy Eurovision Song Contest winning songs like The Brotherhood of Man or something like this, and we were listening to it as something from the West, which was very great. We had our own Beatles sounding bands, we had our own jeans trousers, we had our own non-iron t-shirts and so on and so forth, and it was all of completely low quality. We were also trying to eat the way that the Western people ate, so Coca-Cola you couldn't buy, but for example in Czechoslovakia you could buy Kofola, which is now more popular than Coke in former Czechoslovakia because it has a very distinguishable and a very nice taste. Polo Kokta that was produced here as a Polish Coke was totally not drinkable. They tried to restore it as a sentimental product a few years ago, but it was totally I was not able to drink half a liter even. In East Germany when you go, they have Vita Cola, and Vita Cola was also the East German response to imperialist drink Coca-Cola was. By the way, I like Vita Cola, but the Germans do not like it at all. They say it tastes like Coke with vodka without any alcohol. So it's neither a Coke nor the pleasure, right? Anyway, the thing is that we were not really keen on propaganda, right? We were resisting to that propaganda. And we were also knowing the fact that it was better in the West, so it was the dream of everyone to go to the West. Let's see if it was possible. So we would go like for about 150 meters, and we would see that in a moment. The passport office. Yeah. I can hear my